It's one of the most dangerous places in the world a child can be. Where is it? Church. We'll explain right now on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. Don't take our word for it. Most of us have by now heard that on Tuesday, Pennsylvania's Attorney General Josh Shapiro released an 884-page report on sexual abuse in 6 Roman Catholic dioceses of that state. A grand jury investigation has exposed how those dioceses covered up sexual abuses by some 301 predator priests over a period of 70 years. It's essentially a lifetime. Well, the grand jury identified over 1,000 victims in just those 6 dioceses examined in the report. But the jurors suspected the real number of victims could be much higher. How many victims are no longer alive and died with their secrets, or were simply too embarrassed to come forward and admit what had happened to them? The jurors accused Catholic Church leaders in Pennsylvania of working diligently to avoid public scandal and protect abusers. Grand jury found that the victims were, quote, brushed aside in every part of the state by church leaders who preferred to protect the abusers and their institutions above all, unquote. One victim who reported sexual abuse to the church was told the church would hire a private investigator. It did. The investigator investigated her, the victim. Shapiro, the state attorney general, said, quote, church officials routinely and purposefully described the abuse as horseplay, wrestling, or inappropriate conduct.
Ed.
It was none of those things. It was child sexual abuse, including rape.
Is there anywhere in this report an example of one child of any age or gender who came forth and said, why, sure, I was abused once or even multiple times or by a variety of priests, and I don't care. I enjoyed it. Didn't affect me in the least. Is there a single example of that anywhere? Could we hear from someone in our audience? You know, this is a live call-in show. You can call in 441-3000. And tell us that you've been abused and you'd like to be abused again.
Well, this is the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network, the voice of atheism in Florida. Our website, talk.aof.ngo, and your opportunity to insult an atheist for only $2. Where can you get a deal like that? Ed Golly with Jim Peterson and Joe Reinhardt in the studio talking about the most significant issue of the week, in our opinion at least. As the story broke, it came as no surprise to those of us in the community of reason, because we've long understood that the institution of religion has evolved into a huge business conglomerate that will do virtually anything to survive. Profits above all. It is an environment of profit above all, as religion extracts billions of dollars from the poor and gullible of the world, usually those who can least afford to be ponying up the money in order to retain power, control, and financial security. And all this occurred in only one of the 50 United States, and not even in the entire state, although most of it, where I believe 1 out of 4 people are Catholics in Pennsylvania. And that doesn't even include the territories. So while Catholicism might be a little bit regionalized in the nation, maybe predominant in the Northeast, as opposed to the flyover states, the lack of scrutiny available to ascertain the ethical or financial misconduct that could potentially be taking place in the nation's churches mean we reasonably multiply the violations probably 50-fold throughout the country and its territories. I thought we'd take a look at some of the reasons that this is such an environment for the perpetuation of this type of crime, and abuse of children.
Well, before you start that,
All
I
right.
would like to say that other studies have shown that there's no difference in the frequency of clergy sexual abuse by denomination, region, theology, or institutional structure.
It's part of God's plan.
It is part of God's plan. And it's not just a Catholic issue. And in fact, they estimate that there are 70 cases of child sexual abuse a week in Protestant churches. And the only statistics they could find is based on an insurance company that, or some insurance companies that insure churches against these kinds of things, among other things, and how much they've paid out based on between 1987 and 2007. They covered 165,000 churches and reported 7,095 claims of alleged sexual abuse by clergy, church staff, congregation members, or volunteers. So, and we know that only about 5% of all child abuse get reported.
That's Judy Adkins
5%.
talking here on the forum. We
Wow.
neglected to introduce her.
I'm reminded of the quote by the bank robber, was it Willie Sutton or whatever? And then, why do you rob banks? He says, well, that's where the money is. And so that brings us to the analogy, which is, well, why do you attend church? Well, that's where the children are.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're in a church school. Schools, of course, many parochial schools are church run.
And of course, kids are so vulnerable because they're conditioned from the time they can comprehend the language to believe in this fairy tale of gods and sin and devils, which can be used to manipulate them very easily.
And to obey.
Right. So that it's just really all the planets are aligned for these predators to come into this environment.
Every account I read, the initial reaction of the church is that there's something wrong with the accuser.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Exactly.
now see, that's where you're wrong, Joe, because the Pope weighed in on this today, and the Vatican expressed shame and sorrow yesterday about the grand jury report. Decried
70 years too late.
abuse as criminally and morally reprehensible and prayed for them. You know how much good that does. But, the important thing is that it is what he didn't say, which is that, we're going to take steps to ensure this doesn't happen again.
Well,
I think maybe misunderstood. It's PREY.
and the Pope was accused in Argentina of covering up pre-sexual abuse there back in the 2000s and teens. And in fact, when a reporter tried to report on it, he sent his security guards to make sure that the reporter understood that this was not kosher.
Sure. So you're right, Judy. Think about how much more prevalent this can be in countries where you have people that are significantly poor, and the government agencies, the equivalent of our attorneys general, are not prosecuting these things because the church has so much power in those communities and so much wealth, always seeking to protect that first and foremost.
And again, it's a hardship that's befallen someone else. And the damage, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is not necessarily visible. It's not as if you stole somebody's watch or broke their arm or whatever. It's more or less something that they're trying to describe to you. And the church's position on it, when you come to them and describe these atrocities, is sort of as if I said, well, I have a headache. And you said, well, no, you don't.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
No, I was just going to say, I saw an interview this morning, in fact, on MSNBC from a gentleman who had been among the abused. He's about 50 or 60 years old now. And he talked about his experience in trying to get the Pennsylvania state legislature to take up sanctions against the church. But they refused to do so. And this reflects the political influence of the church and the reluctance of legislators to go up against an institution that is thought to be revered by a large portion of their population. And that's part of the problem, is that in too many cases, the institution of the church is what is violating people's rights, as institutions of all kinds are wont to do. But religions are especially well placed to take advantage of their situation in that regard.
In fact, there was a survey done, the Journal of Pastoral Care reported on a survey in which 1,000 senior Southern Baptist pastors were randomly selected from 15,000 churches in 6 states. And they were asked to anonymously report that they had engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior. And that was 14.1%. Now, this is not just child abuse, but taking advantage of their church members, of people who come to them for counseling.
Ministering to the ladies.
Ministering to them.
Yes.
And 70% had knowledge about other ministers who had engaged in inappropriate sexual contact.
Jerry Falwell got ratted out by some other televangelist.
Yes.
And shot all those pictures of him with the
Right.
prostitute. It wasn't the police that did it. It was one
Right.
of his competitors. I think competitor is the right word.
Yes,
it
I
is.
think you're right.
It's very clear that Judge Roy Moore missed his calling, isn't
Yes.
it? He belonged in the clergy. What the hell was he thinking, trying to get a political career going? And probably more profitable, too. Tax-free income.
Oh, those
Well,
huge
of course, it's-
PACs, and
Yeah.
you can keep all the money for your campaign if you don't spend it.
Well, he practically was a clergy person. He tried to get the 10 Commandments
Yeah, right.
embedded
Yeah,
into
you're
the
right.
state capitol, and he based his whole career on his religious.
He sat at a bench when he should have sat at a pulpit.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no commandment against pedophilia, is there? So what's the
There-
problem, Jimmy?
there-
Probably, I don't know.
Yeah, there
There
is
should be.
commandment against with abuse, with having sex with anyone, except that it doesn't cover your own daughter.
Well, you can sell them, right?
Yeah,
So
and you
incest
can
is
have sex
okay.
with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
So
that's
but-
right.
human trafficking and
Yeah.
slavery are just natural elements of Christianity.
Hmm.
And probably other major
No,
religions.
there are
how often-
instructions in the Bible on how to buy and sell your slaves and how to
Yeah.
sell your daughter into slavery.
And which it's, and I think as we were talking about earlier before the show started, it's a felony in Florida for someone to not report child abuse. So, and a church can lose their tax exempt status if they commit illegal activity. So my question is, it's obvious the Catholic Church is complicit with covering up these crimes. Why do they still have tax exempt status?
See, I think it's time for us to call for the licensing of these businesses. They're in the business of selling superstition, sort of the same way Trump was in the business of selling the idea that his techniques can make you rich, when in fact all the secret to wealth in Trump's case was inheritance.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
the rest of us, we've got to resort to it the old-fashioned way, scratch off. But anyway, that's, he
That's
paid a
pretty
$25 million compensation to the victims
Right.
of his fraud. Why isn't the church held to the same accountability? They have
Well,
no
they
more
are. A
evidence.
lot of the
Yeah,
dioceses have declared bankruptcy so that they could avoid paying that.
But what I'm getting at is that, it's time to license churches in the same way that any other business is being licensed, so that when we find out that they're in the business of scamming their parishioners or embezzling money or committing crimes against these people and trying to cover them, we can yank their license and put them off the map.
Well, and the only problem with that is that licenses are usually given to organizations that provide a useful public service. What useful public service would a church provide? That's my question.
Interestingly enough, only 30% of the Catholics in Pennsylvania look to the church for guidance on right and wrong.
Only
So they know
Where
they're
do they
being-
look? Where do the other 70% look?
Common sense.
Television?
Common sense.
Common sense.
The
It's
same
a
place
very
we
high
do.
Same place,
percentage.
Yeah.
same place those heathens look. Huh?
That's
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Just ordinary life, that's
If they
part
need
and
any
parcel.
help with,
Churches often claim to be the divinely sanctioned moral arbiter of society.
Mhm.
Now, is that claim justified?
Well, what intrigues me about it is that why does it fail to teach the priests morality? The people who are supposed to be teaching the rest of us morality by their own proclamation are immoral themselves.
Well,
So
one
it doesn't
thing-
work amongst the teachers.
one thing that every priest
Who are you
knows
to tell me?
is that he doesn't know. Okay.
Yeah.
And he knows we know that he doesn't know, which is to say that he goes through his life pretending to know things that flat out can't be known. He makes his living as a professional pretender. Maybe liar is a more accurate word. Now, a guy who does that makes his life work at pretending, which if you're gay, up until very recently, you had to pretend quite hardly that you weren't. So a person who makes their entire life, their entire living, their entire morality is based around hypocrisy and a lie. Well, how do you expect them to act?
Well, let's give them a break. After all, they're not necessarily liars. They're fantasists.
Well, they could
They
be-
create whole worlds
Yeah, right.
of fantastical circumstances and beliefs and so forth. And people subscribe to them, and it makes them happy.
The definition of fantastic is fake or phony. That's
Yes.
that's the first.
And
You're
then-
giving it away.
I mean, I blame priests for what they do. That's to be said. But to me, the bigger sin, so to speak, is what the church does in the cover up, because that is
Sure.
bankrupt and completely I don't
Because
even
you
have the
know at
word
the
for it.
highest levels, they
Morally
know this has been going
Yes,
on
they
for all
know.
of the history of the church,
Yes.
right?
And
In fact,
an organization owned, operated, and run exclusively for and by men. Now, the idea that certain homosexual or erotic oddities would crop up in that kind of society is an absolute certainty. And arguments have been made, not by me, of course, but by others, that the entire Catholic Church from its foundation was nothing other than a homosexual fraternity.
Well, now I'd have to argue with that, because I went to Catholic school
huh.
where I was regularly beaten by nuns.
441-3000.
They're just
If
there
you'd
to help.
like to give us your opinion on the issue, we'd sure like to hear from you here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. 441-3000. Put you on the Atheist Forum with real live atheists, and you can insult an atheist for only $2 if you think anything
And
we've
insult Ed
said
for free.
warrants it.
Yes.
I'll pay the $2.
Yeah, me too. We're all
Well,
free today.
and-
It's a bargain.
And in following up with what you're saying, Joe, at the same time, you've got these guys that are serving in the priesthood in this position of total sexual frustration because they can't get married,
Right.
right?
Yeah, which only exacerbates.
They don't exactly. You're just pouring gasoline on the flames to do
Yes.
that, and then
But child abuse is not, most child abusers outside of the priesthood are married. That has nothing to do with,
Really?
this is a sickness.
No,
And-
I don't want to associate the idea that because one is a homosexual that they are
Exactly, that's-
pedophiles by nature,
No,
or
they
that-
are not.
or that they are recruiting children. I'm 100% opposed to that idea. If I gave that impression, and I think I did, I want to correct myself. I was wrong on that.
But
Mhm.
yeah, the majority of child abusers are married. And so the notion that just because these people are supposed to be celibate, which most of them are not, because that would also mean that you couldn't masturbate or have wet dreams, and those things.
Well, I can't control the latter.
You're right. So I don't agree with that notion at all, because not that I don't think it's perverse to have people live in a celibate situation, but that does not, from what I've read, it does not influence the pervasiveness of child sexual abuse.
Well, the celibacy for priests was originally installed so that any of their properties would go to the church,
Right.
because they had no heirs and assigns. I've made the point in the past that child abuse is an example, but the unstoppable drive of any organism is to have an orgasm. They can do that in awfully strange ways, many of them, and rightfully so, illegal. Okay. But when it comes to being sexually abnormal, there's only one sexual abnormality, and that's abstinence.
Yes. Well, I
And who
think
were we just talking
child
about?
sexual abuse is
makes
probably
you-
an
No,
abnormality.
It makes you
that's not
forgetful.
abnormal. We're talking about abnormal and unnormal.
Okay.
Sexual abuse is abnormal. Sexual abstinence is unnormal.
Okay.
So would you say then that sexual repression is part and parcel of this problem? It's not the fact that they're just men, but it's the fact that their sexuality
Oh,
is forbidden for them to
I might as well
express.
slander everybody. When I was in high school, there was nobody hornier than Catholic high school girls. Nobody,
Okay.
because that's all they ever thought about. The ones that I had any association with,
Because it was
they were
forbidden.
obsessed with it because it was so forbidden.
So which of
Exactly.
you geniuses can tell us the answer to this dilemma in 2 minutes before our break? I can give you an extra 30 seconds.
I can settle this in 2
Jesus.
syllables. RICO.
Here.
And I think a reasonable question as to why the RICO statutes aren't being vigorously applied to this operation. Is it not an ongoing criminal operation? It appears to me.
RICO, how do you define that? Racketeering and,
And something corrupt.
commission of,
yeah.
Yeah, Judy will look it up
Racketeering,
for us.
corrupt
But,
acts or something.
you know, the
Well,
problem is you've got to find a state attorney that would take the very unpopular position of prosecuting a church. We know in Florida, our state attorney is for sale, right? She was bought off by Trump, so she takes a bribe.
Oh,
The Catholic Church puts 50 grand in her reelection campaign. End of problem, right? They could probably buy her off for 20 grand.
and speaking of Florida, guess who has the most reported instances of alleged sexual abuse against children
The states.
New
Come on,
Jersey.
of the states? No.
Delaware?
No.
Alaska.
Florida.
You
I'm
gotta
just
be
guessing.
joking. Huh.
Hey, we're number one
We're number
Yes.
one all the time.
We're number
It's
one in
just
the
so
daft.
tiresome.
of the daft. Excuse me.
That's really well. Of course, we are the third highest population in the country. But is there anything else to which you
Well,
can attribute that fact?
We
that
have
you-
all of
that you
these
think-
older avuncular types who live here.
Okay,
Hmm.
and the weather's nice.
However, pertaining to uncles.
Yes. Thanks for clearing that up.
Well, a reference to what Judy said about most
Yes.
abusers are married.
Yes.
I thought it had something to do with audiovisual uncles.
No, it has to do with
No.
showing off my vocabulary.
Okay.
And I appreciate your telling me what it meant.
Yeah.
All right, fine. So you're listening to the
Exhibitionist.
Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're going to pause for just a moment to tell you a little bit about Atheists of Florida, the organization behind this program, after which we will resume. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Okay, Joe is going to enlighten us with a quote here on the forum.
Right away? All right,
Quoth
fine.
the raven nevermore.
Well, actually, this is quoting Voltaire, who says, "To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize." I think that applies pretty accurately to the church and its hierarchy, which Robert Ingersoll once said, you never have to worry about investigating the church. If you criticize it, it will investigate you. And lo and behold, they cited an exact example of a girl who reported
Yes.
and they investigated her. Robert Ingersoll died in 1899. Isn't it as if these guys weren't prescient?
Well,
One of-
go ahead.
Well, one of the signs of a cult is that you're not allowed to question, doubt, or dissent your leader. And, there's no question, the Pope is infallible in certain things. So there's,
how would you contrast that with the leader of the United States today?
well,
He too is a certified genius, a stable one. at that.
Stable,
Yeah.
but he permits no
He's a
criticism.
good example of the kinds of aberrations, sicknesses that can infect an institution like government or religion or whatever, and can go on for centuries or decades or centuries thereafter before they can finally be corrected. But Trump, his popularity to me is symptomatic of the popularity of world figures and despots all over the world. And his popularity is directly related to how much the people who admire him think that he can actually do for them. It's not him that they admire. It's the fact that he thinks he's going to make their life better or make them richer or do them some good,
Right.
or at the very least do some harm to the people they don't like.
Well, you would think that this whole episode is distinctly retrograde, because you think after, let's say, 5,000 years of civilization, in which we have ever so gradually accumulated higher and higher standards of education and so forth, that people would now be in a position where the institutions that used to govern, Inquisition, anyone, no longer have the same power and strength as they once did. On the other hand, those authoritarian expressions, such as our current administration, have the advantage of a very recent historical experience of fascism, Nazism. It wasn't all that long ago when the whole of South America, and for that matter, back in the 20th century, the whole of Europe was dominated by fascist institutions. And apparently we have not learned as much as we needed to learn to avoid those kinds of conditions.
but I think a lot of that comes from the evangelical church and to some degree the Catholic Church, where especially in the evangelical churches, it's an us versus them. We're the saved, we're the pure, we're the righteous. And those people over there are going to die and burn in hell. And you can't question the Bible. It's inerrant.
And anything we happen or need to do, or even just want to do to people of other beliefs, is insignificant.
Yes.
It increases the kingdom of God here on earth, and whatever we do to them is just a very small sample of what the Almighty has in store for them.
We have to try to save them because we have to show them the way to righteousness.
Right, and if it takes a chain and a whip to do that,
Yes.
then by
Or
God,
death.
it's for their own good.
Yes.
Torquemada, again, used to let his subject take as long as possible to die because it gave them more chance to recant. And he would cry when someone would pass away without accepting the Almighty.
And you couldn't torque them out of it either.
No, they needed to be torqued pretty good.
The Catholic Church is actually a representative of a foreign government, which is the Vatican, which is essentially
Has its own army.
a dictatorship. Yeah. And I suppose you could say that about any Christian religion, because the God that it represents is a foreign entity with ideals about government that are completely contradictory to what we have in the United States. In other words, their concept of government that is defined in the Christian Bible is for every country to be ruled as a kingdom. And there's virtually no difference between a king and a dictator. There's no difference. And so, whereas the concept of a constitutional federal republic, where the citizens have a say in who runs the state and follow a constitution that can be written by the governed and be amended by them, is totally foreign and unheard of in Christianity and Catholicism. Even the members of the Catholic Church have no say in who runs it. As you said earlier today, Joe, it really is a mirror image of
the mafia.
There you go. Glad you remembered because I'd forgotten. Anyway, go ahead
and it's not
expand
just
on that.
Christianity, because it's Islam and Judaism also. So let's not leave out
Right.
anybody.
No, I want to say 2 points on that. The church, not just Catholicism, and the mafia are built on very similar structures, which is an entirely top-down power structure, and they both offer you the same proposition, which is, it's a very nice life you're having here. It would be terrible if something or someone came along and just screwed it up royally. So why don't you do a little tithing, a little money for the Don, a little praising and adoring, and we'll see if we can't change things so that the entire city doesn't burn down.
That's right.
Just the place across the street.
A little protection, just for
Sure.
you.
Well,
One other, I'm sorry, I said 2 points, and that is, before our audience begins to think that we have nothing better to do than spend our time bashing religion and Christianity
We do.
and Catholicism, I want to make a point in favor of the Catholic Church. I want to congratulate them for having advanced from their previous barbarism involving children to where they just fondle them or rape them. At one time, they would castrate young boys so they could sing tenor or soprano in the choir. And I think the last castrata, as they were called, died sometime in the 1920s. So as a man or woman, it doesn't matter. If I had to choose between being anally raped or castrated, I got to go with rape every time. And so, at least to their credit, the Catholic Church has finally discontinued the barbarism of castrating young children, at least as far as I know.
Well, I'm glad that they cut that off.
So, again, our purpose is not just to criticize.
No, but I think it bears pointing out that all of the bishops and the cardinals of the church in this country should be registered as agents of a foreign power, just like anybody coming over here from a foreign nation to lobby our government needs to register. And that's what they're doing. They're lobbying our government to take us back to the Dark Ages.
You can't get any more alien than supernatural.
That's true.
The ultimate.
Here's a few pointers that I just jotted down about how Christianity differs from what we embrace in our form of government and lifestyle. Slavery and human trafficking are acceptable in Christianity. Right? Now, remember, the word of this alleged purported God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and never needs to be changed because the God allegedly is perfect. Somewhat like our president believes he is, right? Sure. Oppression of women and treatment as second-class citizens is acceptable in Christianity, which is why women had no right to vote or own property or borrow money. They were not admitted to a lot of professions all the way up until maybe 40 to 50 years ago. And before that, all the time that our country was around, before women started to seek their constitutional liberties that had been written in from day one, but never extended to them because of religion.
But you even have now fundamentalist groups which say that women cannot teach men, that they they can't teach men.
Thou shalt not suffer a woman to teach. Right?
Yes.
How can some dumb broad teach a man anything? Any idiot knows that, right?
We weren't supposed to.
Are you saying that we men can't learn anything? Probably so.
No, I'm saying that God made man first, okay? And it was women who came second, and they were taken from man. They were a part of man. Mm-hmm. And it was the woman who brought about the fall. And so the hardships and the horrors of the world are the fault of women. They're the source of temptation. Nobody should get married unless they just can't control their lust. I think that's pretty clear.
And that was part of the wedding vows traditionally, that the woman will honor and obey the husband. Mm-hmm. She is his property, his chattel. She'll do what he says, and
if there's anything you need the women to do for you, just let me know.
That's a very recent tradition that's been overturned. In fact, many people still use those words.
Yes, many people do. Well, and I've even seen women argue that other women should not be allowed to vote because
Sure.
of her religious belief that
Right.
women
Yeah.
should not participate in the
Exactly.
public sector.
You know, I asked my Uncle Charlie, I said, how did you stay married to Martha for 50 years? He said, well, it was very simple. We followed these Christian principles when we got married. It was agreed that I would make all the executive decisions, the major decisions, and Martha would make all the minor decisions. I said, and you never had any problem with that? He says, no, so far we've never had to make a major decision. Abuse of children, like child labor, is acceptable in Christianity, right? Selling children, selling daughters, and so on. These are Christian principles.
At the turn of the century, the Catholic Church lobbied strenuously against labor laws for
Mhm.
children. They thought that for 10, 12-year-old children to work 10, 12, 14 hours a day was perfectly fine. And again, that it tempered them, their mettle, M-E-T-T-L-E,
Yes.
and improved their faith and made pretty good money.
But isn't it odd how that happened to work hand in glove with the factory owners and mine owners who used exploited children
Yes.
to get their child?
In fact, my father went to work in the mines when he was 14.
Wow. And it was always the conservatives that opposed any form of unionization or
Yes.
safer working conditions or an 40-hour working week.
Right.
It's always the conservative Christians who are saying, oh, we can't do that. It'll cut into our profits. We'll go out of business. We'll all die. It was amazing to me when Governor Jeb Bush actually spearheaded and got enacted an increase in the minimum wage in Florida that was above the national average, because that was the outcry, right? Oh, it's going to be all kinds of unemployment. It got
Mhm.
implemented, and what happened? Employment went up.
We heard that song about financial disaster the first time a minimum wage was ever
Yes.
presented.
From the
They've been
very
doing that-
beginning,
They've been
yes.
doing that dance for the last century.
Genocide's a perfectly acceptable Christian trait. I mean, God
Acceptable.
himself
It's
killed
endorsed.
everybody in the world.
It's
Except one
commanded.
old drunk and 8 members of his family because they weren't doing what he said. And then the whole new crop came along, and guess what? They aren't doing what he said. Shows how much he knows about the future, doesn't it? What a dumb God that is.
Well,
Jeez.
he was also reported in the Bible as instructing his followers to smash the infants and children, to slay all the men, and to enslave sexually, presumably, all the
Mhm.
women.
Who were
and-
virgins.
Yes, they had to be
Only if they
virgins.
were virgins.
That's
of
right,
course,
yes.
yes,
So they had to be young.
Those that have not known a man.
Yes.
yes.
Sure. Well, the
Well-
whole concept of cruel and unusual punishment,
Those are the
right,
Midianites, by
came
the way.
into our Constitution because of how people had been punished previously before there was a Constitution to protect them, and religion was the agent of the punishment. We shudder to think about some of the hideous
The
things that-
horrors that were
yeah,
visited upon
upon
millions.
Western Europe during the Dark Ages. I mean,
And
stuff that's just unthinkable.
I was just watching a show about lynching in the South. I think it was on 60 Minutes, Sunday morning, I think. And they would make a big event of the Christians going to town and churchgoers, good churchgoers, going to town to lynch some
Mhm.
young man because he had
Yeah.
eyed a white woman
Oh, and they would
incorrectly.
collect souvenirs too.
Yes,
They cut off
and they
their
would collect
fingers.
souvenirs, and then they would lynch him and burn him alive
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. My mother's from Marion, Indiana,
Mm.
and there was a lynching of at least two young blacks there, and made the national news. The photographer, she had original photographs of that,
Oh,
which you can
wow.
now look up on the internet. My point is that lynching is in no way confined to the South.
Oh, no, it is not.
Very
It is-
popular in the
was not.
Midwest in
Yes,
particular.
yes.
Yeah, it might be helpful from time to time to recognize that we live only that far from barbarism.
Yes.
I mean, the complete, utter breakdown of any kind of
Well,
morality.
we go after ISIS and those people over there because they're barbaric, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not been that long ago that we were barbaric in this country.
How do you go after them? We kill them.
They're
Yeah.
barbaric to the degree that they closely follow their religious
Yes,
books and teaching.
exactly.
Is exactly correlation to their barbarism, and to the degree that we
Yes.
ignore it, speaks for our civilization.
Yes.
We are a kinder, more humane civilization in spite of, not because of.
Yes,
biblical
but in
teachings.
spite of, yes, you're right.
Sure. Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And if you'd like to comment, we'd love to hear from you. 441-3000. Get you on the program to talk to us, real live atheists, about the scandal up in Pennsylvania that evolved this week.
I have a list of some of the victims and things that they endured, about 5 or 6 examples that were cited in this report.
You have the floor.
I'll just read the headlines, and then we may want to discuss one or two in particular, but probably don't need to. One of the priests in the report, a man by the name of Thomas Skotek, arranged an abortion for one of his victims. It was a young girl whom he assaulted between 1980 and 1980, or during those years. He raped her, got her pregnant, and then had an abortion. And according to the archives, suggests that the bishop of the diocese was fully aware of all of this. In fact, he wrote him a letter of condolence, the deacon, right, about how hard it was, for him to be caught at all this. And
What a tough break.
yeah, Saturday Night Live did a sketch one time with John Belushi about the male rape line. About he calls up, no, after I raped some woman, I feel so stressed out and depressed. Anyway, that's reminded me of Saturday Night Live. That's how silly they are. It makes them sound real. Another asked him to get on a bed, and they would bring the boys in and have them remove their shirts and pants and underwear, and then took photos so that they were be used to create religious statues.
Yeah.
Abuse for a holy purpose.
Others, there were a whole ring of priests who would groom their victims with gifts, usually gold crosses.
Yes, I was going to
so
say.
that other priests would then know, oh, here's a guy that's already, conditioned to be abused. You step right in. Here's one victim told police that the priest forced him to perform oral sex and then orally raped the boy, and then afterwards would squirt holy water from a bottle in the victim's mouth to purify him.
It's strange how these people are able, the priests, to be able to reconcile their perverse activities with their high-minded, moralistic, religious values.
It's their fault.
It made a good living for P.T. Barnum, didn't it?
Yeah, but it must be a tremendous mental burden.
According to Religious News Services, in an article from 2014, 93% of sex offenders in general, not just priests, describe themselves as religious.
Wow.
So obviously, religion does not keep you from being immoral.
No, but isn't that because all they do is come out and renounce their misbehavior and they're
Repent,
forgiven? Yeah,
yes.
exactly, right? And that makes them a better person. It's just like George W. Bush.
And then
right?
they
He'd
do
been
it
an
again.
Alcoholic drunkard.
It brings up a central fault, I can't use this profanity on the air.
No,
But here's the point, all right? If some priest rapes my daughter, okay, and then he seeks forgiveness for his sins, right? He's forgiven by Jesus and God. So God forgives the priest. I want to know, what the hell good does that do my daughter?
None.
Right. It's not up to God to forgive the priest. It's up to my daughter to forgive him, right? If it's at all possible.
If it's at all possible.
It's like
Right.
the cartoon that Gary sent us where the 6-year-old's telling the priest, I was raped, and the father says to him, I forgive you, son. Jeez.
One more example here in this article, 800 and some pages that they just released in Pennsylvania, was one priest, Augustine Giella, who abused 5 sisters in the same family.
Mhm.
I'd like to hear more about that.
Well,
that's a new version of All in the Family.
Yeah,
and I can't remember the exact number, but there were names that were redacted in the report that was released,
Yeah.
which means that they are probably still in parishes with access to children.
Yeah. Yeah. And all this happened since about 1950.
Yeah.
Right? So we're looking at a 70-year
In one state.
in one
And only
state.
6 dioceses in one state. There are 8
And
dioceses in
all,
Pennsylvania.
all the information came from church records.
500,000 documents, as a matter of fact, from
It's like-
diocese secret archives. testimony from dozens of victims and the Bishop of Erie. The grand jury has been dealing with this for 2 years. You can see where it'd take them that
Yeah.
long to go
Yeah.
through all this stuff.
No kidding.
Well, here's another question for you. One of the principles, supposedly, is that if a priest hears the confession of somebody who confesses to murder, then the priest is obligated to tell law enforcement that someone has confessed to murder and identify him if he can. Why not extend that same principle to sex abuse?
I don't think they're obligated to report someone who confesses to murder.
Yeah, they are.
They're obligated to report if someone is talking about murdering someone. The crime has not been committed yet. It's my understanding. Now, I could be wrong.
I don't know. I
But-
thought whatever you
It's
said
worth looking up.
was between you and the priest, and if you just
Yeah,
admitted
and-
chopping up your mother with
Theoretically,
Right.
theoretically, yeah.
That's true. But in Florida, the pastor does not have to give their name if they are still required to report abuse, child abuse, but they don't have to give their name when they report it. And that seems like that would
Anonymous tips.
anonymous tips, yes.
And of course, if you're hearing the confession, you probably wouldn't want to report it if you're the person who's committing the
Well,
sin.
and that's because doesn't the priest confess to the bishop or something, or do they even do confessions?
No, they still do confessions.
But don't they? Then the priest confess to the bishop. He doesn't report to another
No, he
priest.
can
does he?
confess to another priest.
Yeah.
I have no
If that
idea.
other priest
I don't know
happens to
either.
have
I wasn't-
similar,
Well, of course they're going to find somebody who was in
Tendencies.
their group too.
yeah,
There
of
was a
course.
whole child porn ring, I believe, in that Pennsylvania group.
They can
Well,
confess
that-
and
yeah,
be
yeah,
all the
forgiven.
nude photos.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton was running that, wasn't
Yeah,
she?
I think
Yeah.
I think
Out of
that's
a pizza parlor,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
I
Her
heard
and
about
Barack
that.
Obama have a pizza party. Yes.
and yet only
Crazy.
2 cases in the report have led to criminal charges.
Yes.
After all this stuff, of course, a lot of them because of
Because of the
statute of
statute.
limitations.
And that's
Or
one of
they're
the
letting
things
them slide.
they're trying to do is to get Pennsylvania to
Extend those.
extend the
Yeah.
statute of limitations. And the Pennsylvania legislature has refused to do so far.
Yeah, that's what he was talking about this morning.
Yeah.
I don't
The
think they could
legislature.
extend it retroactively. If the statute was 10 years and it's now 11, they could change it to 20. But if you're already 11 years out, it won't affect you.
You're in the clear.
Hmm.
You pull it off, you
Legally.
got away with it.
Grandfathered in, pardon
Yeah.
me.
Of course, there's still public shaming, isn't there? If the victim
Well,
knows the
There
perpetrator.
is, and there's also a take away their retirement. You know, the churches
The church could do things.
Yes.
pays these guys a
Creative
salary
thing.
till they
Well,
die.
and I still don't understand why they have their tax exempt status because they've been, like you said,
Yeah.
behaving criminally.
That to me is the biggest sin of all,
Yes, it
because
is.
that's something that we could really get their attention about. They can ignore the police and the justice system forever as long as the money keeps rolling in.
Yes.
And
I think he's just getting this.
yeah, that and I think the thing that impresses me so much is the indifference of the perpetrators about how this affects the people who are
Yes.
their victims and how it ends up affecting their entire lives.
Yes.
It's something they don't outgrow when they become 20. They express extreme difficulty in entering into normal relationships with other people. And I wondered, if they probably don't realize it or care about it or ever think about it. I wonder if they did, if that would ever change their behavior. Probably not.
No, because it's a sickness.
Yeah. It
Pedophilia,
concerns only
child abuse like
the
that,
abuser.
sexual abuse.
Right,
It's a
and that,
sickness.
again, that's the key difference between the priests
and the
and the
And the-
enablers.
and
The one
enablers,
is an
yes.
act of passion, perhaps even
Well,
out
not
of the
passion,
moment, where the
it's
other is cold, clear, calculated.
And remember, priests are in a position of some power, authority, and control.
yeah.
And it's this control that makes it much easier for them to do what it is that they do.
That-
Until
And another sign of a cult is that the leadership induces guilt feelings in its members in order to control them. So, I read of several cases where the young person went to the head pastor or somebody over him or the region and was told, well, you seduced him. It's your fault.
Uh-huh.
So, it's just another form of
Wearing those-
control.
You're the
Wearing
sinner,
those
and you
skimpy
need to
clothes and
repent.
shaking that butt.
Yes.
I see that. I see
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
So, all right. Any final words on all this then?
They're all
It's
final
easy to
words.
identify
Yes, it is.
the problem, but do you think there will ever be any serious reform of these institutions that allow this kind of criminal activity to get?
Well, a certain amount
to
of reform
happen.
is taking place because at the grassroots, fewer and fewer people are attending and donating to Catholic churches.
Not just Catholic, though.
Well, other churches are suffering mainstream,
Well,
except
but
for the
evangelical churches are
are
growing.
growing. Yeah, right.
And they have the
So-
same cultish setup as the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
I'm not
and-
saying that it won't be replaced by something worse.
Right.
And
or
the same
equally as bad.
insulation
Yes.
rather from any kind
Especially-
of legal or
Yes.
financial accountability,
The best thing to do is put your hands in your pocket and keep your money there too.
and keep the kids home.
Humans
Damn
have
it.
demonstrated great
we see.
creativity in coming up with new and better ways of
Yes,
doing damage to their fellow
we said at the
humans.
beginning of the program, the most dangerous places to send your kids. It can be a church. Final question for the staff. Manafort on trial as we speak.
Guilty.
The jury should be coming down. Do you
Lock him up.
think the president will give him a pardon if found guilty? Judy,
Yes.
Jimmy,
Oh, yes.
Joe?
I really haven't thought about it, Ed, but I would say I don't think so.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that
Well,
I don't
two
think
and
he's
two.
willing to pay the political price for Paul Manafort. He doesn't care about Paul Manafort anymore than he cares about
Yes, but
Ivanka.
Paul Manafort knows things.
yes.
Well,
And so the idea, of course, behind the pardon is to keep his mouth shut.
Mhm.
you would
Keep from
think so,
squealing.
but that doesn't do him any good when it comes to Gates and Cohen.
Well, let me say
No.
in
Yeah.
closing, just one little thing here. Et in terris pacem.
What are we left to guess?
Yes.
Oh, okay, fine.
Look it up. Et in terra pacem.
What did you have for lunch, Ed? Possum? Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that wraps it up for the Atheist Forum. Glad you could join us here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and hope you enjoyed the program. And I hope you'll check out our website at atheistofflorida.com or talk.aof.ngo. Now, along with Judy Adkins, Jim Peterson, and Joe Reinhardt, I'm Ed Golly reminding you the same old thing. If the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
make
them
them prove
prove
it.
See you on YouTube.
Yes.